I'm Andrew O'Brien, I'm Director of Policy at Demos, the independent cross-party think tank. Thank you all very much for coming into this fantastic event to launch a new piece of research we've been doing. Delighted to partner with Phoenix Insights on this, called Getting Britain Working, and an open door policy. And I think, there's a great opportunity here. I think there's a certain frisson in the air. It feels like there's something politically has happened over the past few days, which is going to be a debate of interest for us for the next few months as we look to see where the new government is working on. But Labour has been very transparent, I think, in its campaign that it has 5 missions, but the first mission is economic growth and sustaining the highest level of economic growth in the G7. And to do that, it needs to achieve, have a workforce which is not only expanding at the speed required to meet the demands for, the jobs that we're trying to create in our economy, and to kind of channel the investments and the economic opportunities that we're generating, but as also, and I think this comes out very strongly from this research, is, the quality of work as well, and boosting productivity and making sure effectively we're putting square pegs in square holes, and we're not seeing people who've got the potential to develop and become very, very highly productive members of society stuck in careers and jobs where they can't get an opportunity to progress and develop. And to do that, we need to have, inject some dynamism into our economy. And I know colleagues at the Resolution Foundation and others have come to similar conclusions. But we also need to make sure the policy environment is right. And I think that's where Andrew Phillips and colleagues who've been working on this report have done a great job in outlining some of what those options could be. And that's the theme for this report launched today. So I'm going to pass over to Andrew in a moment, and he's going to talk through the findings. We've got a few copies which you'll be able to pick up, and we've got some more copies arriving as well during the event in classic British style. A printer bust at the venue when they were printing it, but they are in the midst of printing it as we speak, so you will get a nice warm glossy copy. So look forward to that in the networking. But Andrew will talk through the report, and then I'm going to pass over to Anne-Marie, to Catherine, and to Tony, and they're going to give their views and responses on what Andrew said. Then I'm going to ask them a few questions, and then I'm going to come over to you, and you're going to be able to grill them for a bit, and then we're going to wrap up, and there'll be some opportunity for some more networking and for some more chat afterwards as well. This event is being live streamed, so I'm holding this microphone, but it's not actually doing anything in the room because it's purely for their benefit online. So if you're expecting some big booming voice from me at the back, I'm afraid you'll just have to work on on my natural tone. But I think that's that. And we also got some potential opportunity for questions online as well. So if you are watching online, streaming in, do feel free to type in some questions there, and we'll try and pull out some of those in the Q&A session. So with all that done, Andrew, I'm going to pass over to you, and you're going to give us an overview of this wonderful report, Open Door Policy.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone for coming along today. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Catherine and the team at Phoenix Insights as well for supporting the research project. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Demos for all their work on the project and their help organising this launch event today. So here we are a few days after the general election. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the kind of labour market challenges the new government is facing, and why enabling more people to access employment support and careers advice can help address some of those challenges. And then going to talk through the research findings in our report, and then cover the kind of 2 key recommendations that we've included today that we think the new government should consider implementing. So, as I'm sure everyone knows, the new government has a mission to kickstart economic growth, but the UK's underperforming labour market could seriously hinder that mission. The pandemic brought a sudden end to employment growth in the UK. We'd had steadily growing employment rate during the 2010s, but the employment rate today is lower than it was in 2019. And the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast is that the employment rate will be lower in 2029 still than it was in 2019. So if that happens, the 2020s for sort of employment and labour market will look very different to the 2010s. That's a big challenge for the new government looking ahead over the next parliamentary term. It's also important to emphasise that UK employment since the pandemic looks unusual internationally. The UK is the only G7 country where we have a lower employment rate now than before the pandemic. So that could seriously hold back the government's plans to grow the economy, as well as some of their more specific policy measures. So think of the measures to boost house building or to build more electricity infrastructure, for example, those require more workers and more workers with the right skills. So it's important to enable more people who are out of work currently to access advice and support to help increase employment overall. But it's also important for people who are in work to access advice and support. So we know it's beneficial for individuals, but also for businesses and for the wider economy, for people to gain new skills and qualifications and access training. But we currently in England have very little infrastructure really to allow adults to access advice on thinking about what kind of skills or qualifications or training should I consider accessing or taking. We know also that accessing kind of advice and support can help give people the confidence they need to consider changing job or changing career, and enabling actually more people to move jobs and move careers or move between different industries. That kind of dynamism in the labour market is something the Resolution Foundation recommended should be part of the economic strategy for boosting productivity in the UK. The new government does, I think, sort of recognise the importance of these policy areas. I think in Rachel Reeves's speech yesterday, she referenced reforming the skills system for a changing world of work and tackling economic inactivity and getting people back to work. And the Labour Manifesto included several policy commitments in this area, including the National Jobs and Careers Service idea, focused on getting people into work and helping them get on at work. So both that kind of supporting people in work and out of work idea. At Demos, we think that's a really positive commitment. It's along similar lines to a proposal which we published a couple of years ago, which we described as a universal work service. So a new public employment service designed to offer employment support, skills and careers advice with universal access to anyone who wants it. So in this research project, what we wanted to do was dive down into that in a bit more detail and explore some more detailed questions regarding who wants to access employment-related advice, what do they want to access, how do they want to access it. So we conducted a 4,000-person survey. We did a segmentation analysis of the survey data, and then we ran 3 workshops with 3 of the segments that we identified. So what did we discover? We found that there's significant unmet demand for accessing employment support and careers advice. And that's true for both people in work and also true for people out of work. Currently, we have 2 main public services which offer support and advice in England, Job Centre Plus and the National Careers Service. At the moment, job centres only offer support to people who are receiving unemployment-related benefits. So that excludes the clear majority of the population. And in fact, there was a recent piece of OECD research which showed that only 1 in 5 people looking for jobs in the UK use Job Centre Plus, and that was the lowest proportion of any country included in the OECD's analysis. The National Careers Service, on the other hand, is open to anyone in England, but in our survey we found that half the working age population have never heard of it, and in the workshops that we ran with people, we found even people who had heard of it really didn't know what it offered or what it provided, and they often associated it with the kind of often poor experiences of getting careers advice at school, which was a kind of barrier, and they thought it would not be particularly helpful for them. So the consequences of this, first, based on the survey, we find that up to 9.7 million people are missing out on accessing employment advice. So these are people who are interested in accessing advice, but they haven't used either Job Centre Plus or the National Careers Service in the last 2 years. And then second, we identify there are up to 2 million people who are currently out of work and who are interested in getting a job, but they also haven't accessed advice in the last 2 years. So we call that the kind of back to work support gap. I then mentioned we ran a segmentation analysis of the survey data. So that broke the working age population into 7 segments. I'm not going to run through them all now. Find them all in the report later, but I'll mention the 3 which we identified as being of particular interest. So one of those was working parents, as we called them. So the majority of that group are women, usually with younger children, who are looking for jobs which enable them to balance kind of family and kind of career objectives. The second was a group we called Looking for Good Work, which spans people both in and out of employment, but these are typically people looking for kind of better quality jobs with more hours, and with a permanent contract, or for a job which is suitable if they have a health condition or disability. And then the third group we identified, which we think policymakers should focus on, is a group we called cautious but open to change. So these are people who are in work, often been in the same job for a while. They're kind of potentially interested in starting a new job, but they kind of lack confidence and are kind of worried about changing job or career. So we ran a workshop with each of those three segments, and so combined with the survey findings, here are sort of three key insights that we picked up from the research. So first, people want to access a really wide range of different types of advice. So some people are interested in moving into work. Some people want advice on progression in work. Some people want advice on kind of really practical things like CVs or interviews. And that really emphasizes the need for flexible support for each individual. Second, our workshop participants had a really strong preference for an independent or an impartial service, as it was really kind of key to gaining their trust. So there was quite strong skepticism about employers offering this kind of advice, for example, because people didn't trust them to be independent, to have their best interests at heart. There were also somewhat mixed views about it being a kind of government-run public service as well, for the same reason. So I think that kind of trust principle is really important in thinking about a service which is open to anyone and people actually want to use. And it's actually worth noting that it aligns really well, actually, previous research conducted by NatSen, King's College London, and Phoenix Insights as well, which looked at better sort of key interventions people identified for better, longer lives. And one of those was free independent career advice at any age. And again, the kind of that independence point really came out quite strongly in that research. And then third, overall, more people prefer the kind of online or remote access service, so being able to use a website or speaking to someone via video call or telephone. And workshop participants in particular kind of thought about, we asked them about the trade-offs of this, and they said that would be accessible to more people. So for example, the people in the working parents segment in our workshop talked about how that would be better for them, enabling more flexibility and more convenient for them, balancing kind of childcare and accessing advice. So based on all the research, we have kind of two key recommendations in the report. So the first key recommendation is that we think the government should introduce what we call an employment advice guarantee. So we think that should be the underlying principle for the new National Jobs and Careers Service that Labour put in the manifesto. A guarantee that if you want advice related to jobs, careers, work, you will be able to get it. And that may not sound sort of hugely radical, but it's very different in terms of communication to citizens. We don't have anything like that at the moment. It's important to emphasize we do have a lot of different programs and services and organizations that deliver support and advice in this space. And so we think the guarantee actually, at least to begin with, can largely be delivered by existing infrastructure that we have. But it's kind of making sure people know it's available. And then the second kind of part of it is also that we think the guarantee should include extra advice or support for people who are out of work but want to return to work, recognizing that they rightly should be a priority, and on average will need additional extra support compared to people who are currently in work already. The second recommendation is that as a first step to delivering that employment advice guarantee, the government should create what we call a digital front door. So this applies to England. And the aim of the digital front door should be to make it as easy as possible for people in England to access careers advice and employment support. A proposal which is also sometimes called a kind of one-stop shop type approach. So it should be a website offering kind of online tools, digital guides, as well as offering the opportunity to speak to an advisor, kind of online, video call, telephone, whatever people prefer. And its purpose as a front door is really to direct people to existing services and programs and organizations. So its primary role should be to have that kind of initial, if you like, triage kind of conversation with someone, and then direct them to an appropriate kind of service for them, whether that's a national program, something delivered regionally at combined authority or local authority level, whether that's a local charity relevant for them. And in a constrained fiscal environment that obviously the new government is in, we think that creating that kind of digital front door is cost effective for the government, because we don't think it requires a huge amount of additional spending to create it. We recommend allocating 50 million to set it up and run it initially. But it also can make better use of the existing resources that both central government and also combined and local authorities are already spending on employment support programs. In making this recommendation, I also just want to emphasize two things, which is this isn't a new idea. The recommendation is for England because there is already something actually quite similar in Wales called Working Wales, which we've kind of drawn inspiration from in creating this recommendation. And second, I also want to acknowledge that a digital service will not be accessible for everyone. There are some people who are digitally excluded and some people who would obviously prefer speaking to someone in person. And that, it's a first step towards delivering the employment advice guarantee. So offering in-person advice and support should absolutely also be part of that service and that offer moving forward in the kind of medium term. But creating a digital front door is a really good first step the government should take on this agenda in order to provide universal access to careers advice and employment support. And if the government does this, it can close that employment advice gap that I mentioned and boost workforce participation, productivity, and ultimately economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, why not? Round of applause. Really, really interesting insights there and some practical policy support. And I love how the kind of nomenclature of policy is already changing for new government as well. Guarantee, a new employment voice guarantee. How many guarantees will be launched under this Labour government over the next few years? Hopefully this will be one of the first. But thanks, Andrew. Well, we've got a stellar panel as well to kind of digest some of what Andrew said, to give some of their insight, and then also to kind of have a conversation with you in the audience. To my left, I have Anne-Marie Soyinka, Assistant Director of Skills and Employment Policy at Greater London Authority. I understand you also managed an employment support scheme at Southwark Council as well. So unlike me in my ivory tower, you've actually got some experience of the issues we're talking about. So that's fantastic to have. We've also got Tony Wilson, who's Director of the Institute for Employment Studies, which I think you're in the middle of a commission yourself, Tony. So, you've got your head down and thinking about some of these issues, no doubt. Hope Andrew hasn't stolen any of your ideas as part of that commission either. And Catherine Foote, Director at Phoenix Insights, who we're again delighted to work with this on, but Phoenix Insights done an incredible amount of research and investigation to these topics through a number of different pieces of work, and got great expertise on this through the work that they do. So delighted to have that kind of insight. So Anne-Marie, I might start with you and I'll go to Tony. I'll go to Catherine and I'll go to Tony, just to kind of get your reflections on some of the challenges you think Andrew's raised, what you think of some of the policy ideas are there, and just what you, I guess, for the new government coming in, what your initial thoughts would be of how they can solve some of those issues. So I'll pass the mic over.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Thanks for having me here today. So obviously I work for the Mayor of London, and a big part of his manifesto for the third term was economic growth in London, which aligns with a lot of what is in the Labour manifesto for kind of national economic growth. And so we are in the process of starting to develop a London growth plan, which is looking at a lot of the things that this report has raised, and we're consulting with businesses, with business support organisations to kind of identify some of the gaps that we have and how we pull together a system that is responsive to employer needs. Within the Greater London Authority, we have some budgets that are delegated to us or that we deliver on behalf of government. So the biggest of that is the adult education budget. And as part of that, we have a bit of flexibility to be able to try and align provision to the needs of Londoners. But it's we're quite limited in what we can do with that budget. There are lots of legal entitlements that take a huge proportion of that budget. And the budget hasn't increased since 2019 when it was delegated to the mayor, and obviously costs and everything else have increased since then. We also deliver a lot of other programs on behalf of government, like skills boot camps and other programs like that, which are defined nationally, and we have little influence on how those programs are delivered in London and how we kind of shape it to meet the needs of local employers. And so a key thing that we're looking for from the new government is a combining of those budgets and more flexibility over how we use those budgets to meet employment support needs, to meet to create the kind of careers advice that people need. And we have no influence over careers advice or the National Careers Service at the moment, even though we do a lot of work in for young people. So we're in loads of schools providing careers advice. And you mentioned that it's kind of people's memory of careers advice in school can be quite quite boring, but we actually have a really good event going on this week with Formula One, which is which the students I think do find really exciting. So I think for us there's a real opportunity here to link up that careers advice that we do for young people really well with kind of careers advice for adults as well, and so that there is that kind of joined up approach to the sectors where there are real skills gaps. We know that 69% of businesses are reporting a skills gap in their business, and we really want to create a whole system that is responsive to those skills needs, where people kind of understand the career path that leads to to different occupations. There are so many new jobs now from when I was in school that people don't even know exist, and so how do we make sure that we're delivering a whole system approach that is responsive to how the economy is changing, to the career opportunities that exist, and making sure that people are able to link in with that process easily. And one of the programs that we have in the GLA to support that as well on the employment support side is the No Wrong Door program, which is about tying up the system for people so that wherever you kind of come into the system, you're directed to the best service for you. And so that is delivered quite locally. So we deliver that through our sub-regional partnerships. Each sub-regional area has its own integration hub where they're looking at all the different services that exist, and they're able to kind of join those services up better. People know where to refer people onto for different types of support, and it's really tailored to people's needs. And we've had an independent evaluation of that program, which has shown that the impact, the systemic impact of that approach is really, really positive. So we're really in support of a lot of what has come out of this report. We think that the employment support guarantees is something that we definitely support. We have been raising the issue of career support for in-work, for people who are in work for a long time. There's so much available for people who are unemployed, which in itself is not kind of tied up well enough. But when you're in work, and particularly even if that's like a 0-hour contract job, even if that's an insecure job, you often just don't get any access to support to kind of progress your career. And so skills boot camps is a first step for that, I think, because it is open to people who are in work, but we really want to make sure that people get the support that they need to progress their careers and to create a more productive workforce. So I'll leave it there for now and hand over.
Okay. Thank you very much. There was some really great insights. Catherine, I'm going to pass over to yourself now.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everybody. So I work for Phoenix Insights. Let me just briefly explain for those of you that don't know who we are. We're part of Phoenix Group. And if that still doesn't make any sense, it's one of those big shadowy holding companies that runs lots of companies that you might actually have heard of, like Standard Life. It's Britain's biggest pensions company. And I run a think tank for Phoenix, really trying to recognise the wider external world in which pension savers and workers live and work and try to save, and what's working and not working about that system and try to put forward and advocate for proposals to make a difference to people's prospects for essentially future generations of retirees and their prospects for saving enough for an adequate and decent later life and retirement, and being able to stay and progress in good quality work that suits you as you change, as the economy changes, as your life changes as you age, is really why I'm here today and why we supported the work that Demos have published today. Because, of course, the majority of workers who will be working in our new government's economy in 2030, when they need to go next back out to the electorate, or in 2035, are already here, are already adults working in the workforce. And so much of the conversation around careers support in particular, and to a lesser extent employment support, is focused on people leaving school and college. So I'm particularly interested in the cohorts that Andrew's identified and how many of them speak to adults of all ages, and the gap that exists, as you were saying, Anne-Marie, for good quality careers and universal employment support, whatever your current employment status. Because the reasons that people aren't in work or aren't in the right job or aren't in any job are really complex and really personal, aren't they? You know, the national narrative kind of swings. 1 minute it's everyone's retired too early, then it's, oh no, they're back actually, but we're all too sick. But of course, actually, the reality of that is hugely more complicated. And I think in the qualitative work that you did as part of this study, finding out the sort of the barriers for people in terms of confidence, information, certainly, techniques and support to the process of applying for jobs they might not have considered in the past or feel confident to apply for, the experience of trying new industries and new places to work, you know, huge range of issues, how to manage work-life balance in a different way when you have new caring responsibilities, new health conditions. And so what I think is excellent about this work is this beginning to think about how could you provide access to that tailored and more personalised support in the sort of realpolitik that we are today of a very fiscally constrained environment. And I mean, there must be a gazillion think tank reports at the moment in every possible public service, trying to square the circle of how do you handle massive unmet need and demand for something in this incredibly constrained environment. What can we kind of get away with in the short term that won't massively increase costs? And so I think I'm really interested in the digital front door approach. And I like also, as you were saying, Anne-Marie, this need and this benefit in the system to get much better at triaging people, if you like, and at coordinating the offer for people so that people are sent efficiently to the service that already exists and that is already funded, that will most likely help them and suit them, I think is really important. And I think the other thing that you touched on that I'm interested in too is this question of the kind of the labeling of that and the branding of that, and how people need to think about trusting services like that. Lots of talk in reform of employment support about, you know, different sort of job centre plus, but I think rebuilding that trust and confidence in the employment support system with the British people could take a lot, and maybe need more than just, you know, a new colourway for job centre plus. So let me just finish by saying, you know, again, I think there's lots of think tank reports who will have done a first draft maybe a month ago, and they did another one when the manifestos come out, and they've just done another one, and here's the latest one with the right, and you know, and so to an extent, what this report is now, we can now say, we didn't know this when we started, but what we can now say it's beginning to do is provide a little bit of colouring in for the first steps towards the Jobs and Careers England service, perhaps. And I know that Tony is going to do a lot more colouring in as he reports on his commission for the future of employment support, looking at you know, that wider employment support and career system. And let me just end by saying, you know, these are really important, sensible steps that Andrew's set out here, and really valuable ideas. Also in the report, it begins to look a little bit beyond those first steps and talk about what could come next and how this work could develop. Because yes, we're in this fiscally constrained environment where employment support hasn't quite made it into the 6 first steps, or the or maybe not even into quite the first 100-day plan. So we must bide our time and must think about what's realistic. But this is fundamentally such a huge issue for the government to grapple if it's going to succeed in its broader mission around economic growth, to address how do you maximize and grow human capital in what is essentially a human capital based economy in this country, is so fundamental. And it's not fundamental not just for economic growth, but let me finally finish by saying it's also really fundamental for individuals too. The government's published, to go back to finish on your sort of nomenclature point, Andrew, the New Deal for working people. And that New Deal, it seems to me, is very much about the jobs, individual jobs themselves, and how they feel, and how good they are for you, which is critical and important. But I guess the deal that this report speaks to and that I'm interested in is what the deal is for your working life, your whole career. What's fair in the context of another part of the DWP busily talking about the complete unaffordability of the state pension in future, and needing within this first term to be thinking about the increase in the age of the state pension. If we're going to have to do some of that already with a state pension age far beyond what the majority of workers can manage to work up until, what should the deal be for support to remain and grow your incomes and find sustainable work all the way through to 66, 67 and 68? And I think Jobs and Careers Service England, with its digital front door, needs to be part of that deal. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me. I just want to start by saying congratulations to Andrew and the team at Demos for producing this report. It's well worth a read. It's excellent bit of work. So well done, and sort of culmination, maybe not even the culmination, I expect there'll be more to come of like a number of years that Andrew's been working in this space. I think it's really starting to see the fruits of that now. Really very much agree with the recommendations in the report. The guarantee, I think, is dead on. That's in our work on the Commission on the Future Employment Support. We'll be talking similar terms, very much agree around a kind of two-pronged guarantee. If you want help, you'll get it. And if you need specialist help, you'll have access to it. And this is broadly what it will look like. And then there's a question about how we commission that, how we implement that, how we deliver that locally. So I think that's exactly right. And on this idea of a sort of a one-stop digital service, I think it's exactly right too. In our commission, we talk about needing to reform employment support so it's in your pocket, on the high street, and on your doorstep. So we can meet the kind of the one-stop shop bits in your pocket through digital services we all use, and on the high street, so it's got more presence, but also that no wrong door. If we want to reach people who aren't currently looking for work, and this is a fundamental challenge we face, and also the opportunity, I think, that we've got in the next 5 years. We want to reach people who aren't currently looking for work. We've got to deliver employment support closer to where people live, through services they use, from people they trust, and that means working much better locally too. The first step for that, definitely, is just changing this kind of this narrative around employment, this culture, and having this clear and accessible offer and this one-stop digital service. So I think that's exactly right. I'm also really grateful that Andrew's done this, because we weren't planning to talk much about a digital service in our commission. When we do find, I'm in the middle of it, gosh, near the end, thank God. But we thought we'd wait until after the election before we publish. But we weren't planning to talk much about a digital service. You can expect quite heavy referencing and crediting when we do publish the report. There's lots of examples we can build on from the UK and overseas. I think the Working Wales model in particular is really, really positive with the budgets, the resources they've had, building out essentially from devolved career support. But the main thing I want to talk about really was kind of, can we now do it? I mean, there's a consensus around this, and how the mood has changed, right? In just a few sort of short weeks. So in these areas, this area related to employment, obviously the public mood is changing too. But can we now do it? And I suppose there's 3 points I've made, 3 reasons why I'm really hopeful that this government will adopt these sorts of measures, and why I believe we can implement it. The first is, you listen to the Chancellor, and actually, if you read her May's lecture a few months ago, this comes through really clearly. Not just we need to get back to growth, but it needs to be based on security for the economy and for households. It needs to be based on improving productivity, and it needs to be based on kind of fairness, on reducing inequalities. And she talks about active supply side measures. Well, there is no better example of this than what we do in a labour market. And her speech yesterday majored on planning reform, probably the most difficult active supply side measure we can try to get right, as we'll probably find out. Well, this in many respects, in the grand scheme of things, is probably the easiest. Fundamentally, we control so many of the levers here, and we can do so much with the right attitudes, the right culture, the right the right ways of spending our money and using our resource. So that's my first sort of point. I think we've got an economic case. But secondly, we've got a social case. If, like me, bleary-eyed, you listened on Friday morning to Keir Starmer outside Downing Street, 3 things came out to me: service, dignity, respect. And I listen to everything really with the lens of employment. I can't help it. But I just thought those should be the guiding principles of our new employment service. That it's a service, it's a public employment service, treats people with dignity, and it recognises a fundamental dignity of work, which is something that Keir also, the Prime Minister also talks about, and that treats people with respect. And I think we can get those things right in a reformed employment service, we'll be on a winner. That again is a sort of starting point. But the third point is, I think indeed we've got ministers in Liz Kendall and Alison McGovern who really believe this stuff. And I virtually sat on a panel here just over a year ago when Alison McGovern was spelling out her vision for a kind of a more relational and employment-centered employment model. And I think this very much builds on that. And I think we can do more on that too. So look, I think there's huge potential, huge opportunities here. And there's a lot we can do. But I also think it's a massive opportunity, because that gap we've got with many of the rest of the world is one we can fill, is one we can meet. And if we meet that, that is the way out of this kind of, what I find a very stale and depressing debate about how all politicians are rubbish and nobody's facing up to the truth about fiscal constraints, blah, blah, blah. Of course that's right. But if we just got up to where we were before the pandemic, if we were just back in that top fifth of economies nationwide on employment, we'd be upwards of £10 billion better off fiscally each and every year, upwards of 10, 15 towards £20 billion better off economically as well. This is the route out. This is the way that I think that we can do it, and we can do it through the resources we've got. So this is a great sort of a great report, a great start on that, and I think it's things we can build on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie, Tony, and Catherine, for some great comments there. I'm going to ask you all each kind of question, and then I'm going to throw it open to the audience. I'm going to start, Anne-Marie, with yourself. Steve Khan, like all the mayors, he's in Downing Street. He might be there right now, actually, still. I'm sure you probably gave him a full briefing before he went in there. But, if from the GLA's perspective, what would be your ask to this new government, like in this particular policy area? Kind of, if you had kind of a top 2 or 3 things that you'd love for a new Labour government to put in place, what would you be looking for?
Thank you. We've actually been working with London councils to develop our ask for the last few months, really. I think the top things for our ask is a single funding pot. Bringing together all these various different programmes and actually agreeing with London government on the outcomes that you want, rather than designing these programmes centrally and where they're not necessarily applicable to every local area. Agree the outcomes that you want us to deliver, and we'll design the programs locally that meet the local needs of people and of businesses. And also, I guess the second thing would be multi-year funding. So rather than these 1-year cycles where we're not sure whether we can extend people's contracts or not, where we're constantly losing staff within the system, give us a 4-year funding pot that we can, properly plan over the next 4 years, and we can focus on real quality outcomes. So it's not about just getting people into any job and just trying to tick boxes of how many outputs we've achieved, but we can really think about the long-term benefits for businesses, for individuals, matching real skills to the business needs of that we have in London, and delivering quality outputs.
That's great, thanks. And we know Labour's been talking a lot about multi-year funding settlements, actually, and particularly for local councils. So, hopefully this might be an area where they could do that. Catherine, you made a really good point, I think, around, I guess, and someone who also went for a career service when I was young, there's some kind of cultural barriers, potentially, particularly for older workers who might feel like, career services, is in employment services, are they really things that older workers should be accessing? Is this, as you say, not just something for younger people when they're at school and at college? And how do we kind of create that cultural change, I guess, where throughout our careers, our longer careers, as you've kind of mentioned quite worryingly there, particularly for someone like myself who's looking at this long horizon, but we are going to have to work longer. We have to, plan properly our careers in more detail than we did in previous generations. How do you think we make that cultural shift, and kind of what is the role, if there is a role for government, do you think, in helping to get that focus on people in their 40s, 50s and 60s, making sure that we are supporting them and making sure that they're maximizing their potential, and it's not just a kind of a young man's game or a young person's game?
Thank you. Yeah, I think career services in schools have got an awful lot better, haven't they, than they were when than they were when my best friend came out of our filling in our boxes and got assistant dental nurse, and she said, "Well, could they not at least have just said dental nurse?" what did I tick? What did I tick that made them put assistant in front of it? Yeah, and so I think there's lessons to be learned. There are policy choices to be made here, aren't there, about where you choose to invest in career services. And it does, for me, it does come back to this, I guess, this sort of broader question about, what sort of support do we think working age adults deserve and need, and that we feel prepared to pay for. I would argue that this is, if you like, I mean, I'm not sure this is the language of this new Labour government, but this is pre-distributive spending, isn't it? Employment support and careers support. This is about trying to enable people to grow their incomes, to maintain their incomes, so that they won't rely on the redistributive state. So I think there are lots of sort of broad macroeconomic arguments that you can make. But I would certainly like to see the DWP develop a new and deeper understanding of a kind of cohort of workers in that midlife space. I think part of the reason that we're so bad at serving the needs of people, particularly in their 50s and 60s, is that we persist with a model that just says you're either a worker up to the state pension age, and then you're a pensioner, and workers get something and pensioners get something. And we've had, of course, some investment and some new innovations in that 50 plus space. But I think there's a lot you could do if you were to say, well, actually, do you know what, 50 to 70 or 55 to 75 is a distinct cohort that is transitioning through the later phases of their working life and through into potentially accessing some state pension age alongside wanting to continue to work, or beginning to face the onset of really serious health problems that mean that they are so far from the labour market already that they're not easily going to get back in without specific investments. There are lots of different cohorts within that age group, but I'd like to see a new specific focus on them as a client group, essentially a client group that faces, if you like, the most diverse and complex set of labour market issues of any age group.
Thank you, Catherine. Tony, I've got the hardest question for you, because you've got a commission going on, so I'm sure you're prepared for it. I mean, Labour, I think, set this 80% employment target, a rate target for the economy, which sounds pretty ambitious to me, given our current situation. Do you think they've got enough in the policy tank to kind of achieve that target currently? And if they don't, what are the kind of things they would need to do to get anywhere near that level?
Yeah, so how long have we got? Right. I think so. The first thing is, I suppose I think it's important to have objectives, clearly, sort of guiding principles. I think 80% is a really good one. It's ambitious. I think, let's be clear, that's not a single Parliament objective. It just couldn't be. You can't achieve a 5.5 percentage point increase in the employment rate over 5 years. And if you tried, you would probably end up doing some very odd things. You'd probably end up driving the wrong kind of behaviour. You prioritise any job over the right job. You deprioritize human capital kind of investment. You'd be doing everything you could to get as many people as possible into work and keep them there, in any kind of job you possibly could. And I think we need a sort of balanced view. I think there's kind of three broad objectives here. There's maximising participation in the labour force. In the short run, I'd be less concerned whether that's in employment or in unemployment, which sounds weird, but the challenge we got is people who aren't looking for work. So let's get people looking for work first. Let's help them to look for work. So there needs to be participation objectives. There needs to be, I believe, one about good work. And I think there's different ways to measure that. So how you translate that more into policy, I think, needs to be around whether you've got enough income to survive. So something around poverty and destitution, whether you've got the right hours that you want, because we measure that pretty well at the moment as well, actually. Then you might look at a kind of sort of basket of indicators that try to capture qualitatively whether people are kind of happy, satisfied in their work. As you said in the report, Andrew, exactly right. That's a really important determinant of productivity and staying in work too. And then the third, I think, is narrowing gaps. Because again, an 80% target isn't enough if we're not also narrowing gaps in employment and in good work for disabled people, people with health conditions, older people, disadvantaged young people, parents, people in the most disadvantaged areas, people with low qualifications, people in social housing, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to narrow those gaps. Set those as system objectives, translate them regionally, locally, and then let's get all resources we can and add in, overlay local priorities, get all the resources we can into then trying to deliver that. So I would set the employment objective, I'd be setting more like, let's get back to the bottom of the top fifth of countries internationally on employment rates. That'd be more like 78%, because everyone else has gone up while we've gone down. But if we did that, we're talking £10 billion plus impact, like I said. I think that's achievable. What else would we need to do? Health is really, really important, but improving access to employment support through health is really important to that too, but getting waiting lists down and treating people quicker. Skills is really important. I believe we need to move, personally, I think we need to move away from a kind of the sort of entitlement-based model there, where entitlements are clearly important, but towards more one where we commission the sorts of services that we want that would enable us, collectively commission services that would enable us to get people into good work. London's work on merit academies is a great example of that, but there's others too. In the US, some great examples, sector pathways. And economic development, we need to try to build better jobs around the country and try and keep people in those communities, and wider economic and social development is really important to that too. There's a lot we can do. Active labour market policy is one small part. I can't wait to see what happens on mission boards, what the government wants to do. I view this as an accountability and responsibility challenge. I think the accountability for an employment objective needs to sit with Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. The responsibilities beneath that will be spread around Whitehall, and we need the governance then to kind of draw that together. And that's what we need in the mission architecture generally, clear accountabilities, and then an architecture to support responsibilities, and then replicate that, translate that down into London and the sub-regions and different economic geographies as well. Sorry, long answer.
Really useful. Going to open the floor to some questions. I'm not going to move the mic around, but what I'm going to do is just repeat your question for people on the camera, and then I'll pass it over there. So sorry, you're going to hear the same questions twice. I think you were up first, and then you, and then got one at the back. And anybody else? Yeah, one over there. So I'll come to you three first. I'll take them as a group, and then we'll move on.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Melissa Lawford from the Telegraph. As a follow-up for your question, I wanted to ask, how quickly could we see Labour move the dial on levels of economic inactivity? Or what are the kind of best and worst scenarios for how soon or how long we could start to see some change, I suppose, in any of the groups of economic inactivity by reason?
Great. So how quickly can Labour move? That's a very interesting question. You, sir.
Prashant Pandya from the Centre for Social Justice, and I suppose my question speaks to the unmet demand on that side of the panel, and also to the partnership stuff that was on this side. I guess it's quite interesting with the digital front end, because we have a alliance set of charities, about 600 of them across the country, and they often tell us that actually, if you're trying to get a segment that Catherine was talking about, slightly older into work, and particularly if they're inactive for whatever reason, disability mainly, but other things as well, that they can't compete in terms of being able to get referrals with bigger multinationals. And I wonder if there's something in the digital model that might ease that a little bit. Yeah. And also, finally, on the other side of it, which is, I guess, that, liabilities are what they are. If we did manage to get, and I don't think it's necessarily about your guarantee, but if we did manage to get that going, that there might be some possibility of getting some of the ones that perform better but can't get the central contracts at the moment to get those contracts, because there's an awful lot of charities that could do good work with, particularly the disabled, but can't.
So a question there, sort of, there's some about kind of the fairness and the access side of it as well, and then really around the partnership working with the kind of voluntary sector, social enterprises, charities, etc., which are really good points. You, sir, had a question.
Hi, Mike Collins from Ingeus. We're an employment services provider, largest in the capital. Firstly, I think it's great the GLA are petitioning for more flexibility on NEB skills bootcamps. I think it's excellent. My question is more around, too often eligibility criteria and claimant commitments restrict what people can access. And a digital front door and a triage service works brilliantly, but especially on national programs, but even on locally devolved programs, there can be restrictions and a sort of postcode lottery, I think, even in the capital, which is pretty good at devolution. So how do you combat the commissioning of employment services to avoid people not being able to access it because they live in a certain place or they have a specific criteria of unemployment, whatever, to make that triage service work?
Thank you very much. I'll maybe come to Tony and Catherine first on the how quickly Labour could achieve these this progress. How long have they been in office? Is it about 72 hours or so? So roughly by Friday,
Well,
maybe. they've got it
yeah.
done. But no, in all seriousness, how quickly?
Well, we've got new data out next Thursday. Let's see what it says. That data, one important point is the data that gets published is retrospective. It's looking back. The data that's published on Thursday will be up to, where are we now? July. So it'll be up to March, April, May. With the quarter it'll be covering. So we won't even, so if you think forward, even if we think 6 months or 12 months, like we're actually talking sort of 8 or 9 months or 14 or 15 months in terms of actually seeing it in the data. I would say though, more substantively, I think this is going to take time. I think there's lots of reasons it will take time. I think one is that, there's just some really practical stuff that needs to change. Some of it's related to the commissioning of programs, and there'll be some negotiation of that. Some of it's related to supporting the building of capacity and capability and sharing of practice and local partnerships. Some of it's related to the leadership and management of Job Centre Plus, how that works, how services work, practical things that we need to change at the front line. Really important consultation that will need to happen with trade unions, with staff, with people who use services. There's going to be a lot of thinking around design. I think having sort of user-led engagement around kind of how we redesign services. It's fine for us to talk about, and this has been really good in the report, it's been that involvement of service users as we have done in our commission. It's fine for us to talk about that in principle. In practice, there will need to be a kind of white paper process, I think, a consultation and then steps towards it. So I think that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for all of us because we're desperate to see reform and improvement. So I think we'll also see some things happen much quicker in the shorter term. One will be watch out for what happens on universal support. The money isn't out of the door yet. It's a massive program, and it's very, very risky the way it's been designed right now. And it will take a very, very long time to get going the way it's been designed right now. So maybe there's ways to be more pragmatic and be quicker about having support locally for people who are disadvantaged in the labour market, focused on health conditions, but perhaps less tied to the old universal support model. The second is there are a number of combined authorities who I think are ready to go on quite interesting stuff and could work quite quickly, like London. Isn't a combined authority bigger than that, but so I think and there are others too. So I think there's things we will see in the near future. Seeing improvement, demand side will drive fundamentally the changes in employment rate, I think, in the short run anyway. And I think in some of that we might see improvement relatively quickly because I think it's quite a lot of pent up.
So I mean, if I'm kind of putting you on the spot a bit, then is it in the first Parliament we should be able to feel the effects of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to be honest, we may well see employment tends to be a lagging indicator generally. So even if we start seeing big increases in business investment and consumer confidence, which isn't inconceivable on the consumer confidence point, there is a lot of household savings. So we talk the challenge we've got here around inequality in the UK. It's not that we're not a poor country; we're just a fundamentally unequal one. So I think we could see economic improvements, and those will start to feed through into the labour market, and then we'll be hit again by the tightness of the labour market because our supply side policies don't work. The labour market isn't holding back. The growth isn't holding back the labour market. The labour market's holding back growth. So there's things we can do more quickly, though. I think on trying to get job centres, trying to work better locally, trying to get more support on stream more quickly that can help to unblock some of that.
Catherine, what do you think? I mean, you would kind of agree with that assessment, or do you think this is a longer term project? I mean, what's your thoughts?
I agree. But I would let me just add one thing that I think perhaps not because I think it's the most important thing necessarily here, but because it hasn't yet been mentioned, which is that for some of the people furthest from the labour market, what they, when they are asked, say above all else, they are looking for is work that they are able to do on around their wider life. So we haven't talked about the new rights to request flexible working yet. We haven't talked about the new deal for working people quite so much yet. But I think that another kind of reason for hope and optimism, I suppose, is if employers begin to respond positively to the opportunities to do better work on job design, on providing flexible working opportunities, good quality part-time work. Yes, there's a problem with underemployment, people working fewer hours than they would like to, but there is also a problem, if you like, with economic inactivity because the right part-time jobs aren't sufficiently available in our system. So I would also say out with the levers available to government directly and out with what we've been talking about today about employment support and careers advice. I think if we begin to see a shift towards greater access to good quality flexible work, that will make a huge difference for the people for whom a traditional 40-hour week doesn't work.
Really good point there. Anne-Marie, I might come to you on some of we have some good questions on the practicalities. I guess starting with that point around the fairness of access and making sure that those that have got the most challenges don't end up getting kind of left off from the kind of support provided, and also that kind of partnership working and utilising the capabilities of the kind of VCSE sector. Have you got any thoughts about kind of your experiences in GLA around how you sort of tried to combat some of those challenges? And then I might ask you a bit about the postcode lottery, the endless question of devolution. It's kind of always followed by the question of, well, how do you make sure it's not postcode lottery? So yeah, how do you make any thoughts you might have about how we ensure that everyone in a city like London gets access to a similar quality of support, and the variableness of it is reduced? So any thoughts on those two would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think, we know that there are different groups in London that need additional support for various reasons, care and responsibilities, people that face additional barriers, maybe because of their ethnicity or, other biases in the system. And so we have worked for the adult education budget to make it the most accessible, AEB budget nationally. So we've removed a lot of the restrictions that existed in AEB before it was devolved to the Mayor of London in terms of, how long you have to have lived in London, how long, your kind of immigration status, those types of things, how much you can earn before you have to start contributing towards provision. So we've worked really hard to make it accessible to as many people as possible, but also working with boroughs and with sub-regional partnerships to still kind of have priority groups that we know need specific support in different areas. And each of the sub-regional partnerships on the No Wrong Door programme have looked at the priority groups in their areas. So there are people, there are sub-regional groups that are prioritising young people or prioritising, older people or women or whatever it is. So they all have kind of looked at their own local area and looked at those who are facing the most barriers and, are providing that additional support for those groups. And that doesn't mean that we're then, restricting other people from accessing those services, but it's more about how we kind of target and make sure that, those who might not necessarily walk into the door of an employment support service are kind of actively being supported and engaged with the service. And on the point of kind of VCS and partnerships with VCS, that's something that we've been kind of grappling with, I guess, over the years, because obviously we've got limited resources within the GLA in terms of how many contracts we can manage, and when you've got like small value contracts, you kind of need a bigger team to be able to manage the relationships and make sure that those contracts are delivering effectively. So what we've tried to do is we've approached it in two ways. One is that we've created a community outreach program, which is specifically for the VCS, and it's about reaching priority groups, people that are less engaged with the skills system, and really engaging them by using the VCS organizations that they can trust. So going back to that, that issue of trust and making sure that they can kind of reach them, explain the system to them, understand their needs, and then bring them into the system where it best meets their needs. And so we've got a contractor that manages those contracts on our behalf, and we're able to see the outcomes of that. The other thing is obviously a key way that VCS delivers is through subcontracting. And what we found when we first took over the adult education budget is that loads of subcontracting, but loads of like administration fees and management fees as part of that. So the amount that's actually getting to these VCS organizations in some cases wasn't really great. So the first thing we did was kind of limit the subcontracting fees that the big organizations could charge. We limited that to 20%. And if it was going to be more than 20%, they needed to give a really good business case as to what they're doing to really support those VCS organizations that mean that they need to be able to keep a high amount of the funding. But by doing that, you're making sure more goes to the VCS and that they're able to use their specialisms, their relationships, their networks to really target people who need that support.
No, thank you for that. Great points. And I would just say on the kind of VCSE point as well. I used to work at Social Enterprise UK, and we've got a fantastic social enterprise sector in this country. We've got 100,000 businesses, and many of them, their key way of generating their social outcomes is through employment. And so you've almost got kind of mini careers, advice services in a lot of these organisations. And there is more that definitely could be done in growing and stimulating some of that work. And I was privileged to go around the country and meet fantastic businesses where they are taking people who are very much at the fringes of the labour market. They would often go after the hardest to reach because they saw that was the really added value, and so many inspirational stories. So it's we need to get right government support in place, but we could also do more, I think, to help those kind of organisations and businesses who are ultimately providing people with the kind of practical skills and opportunities they need to develop and create flourishing careers. So it's a really great point that you raised. There's a couple more questions at the back. I think one from the lady here, and I think there's one more here. Yep. Oh, and one more there. And these will be our last three, and then we'll wrap it up. So I'll start with you. And again, I'll just repeat them for the camera.
Hello, I'm Alexa Knight from the Mental Health Foundation. We know that good work is a really positive, supportive factor for people's mental health, but also increasingly poor mental health is a barrier to people being in employment. I was wondering, Andrew, if that came up in your research and whether the panel got any reflections on that relationship between support for mental health and good work.
And so a question about mental health and work and support. I'll go for the lady there at the back, and then I'll come to the lady here at the edge.
Hello, I'm Saskia Otto at Human Society. Access to career support is obviously really, really important. As we go on to any sort of research, it's absolutely brilliant. Some of the other barriers that people face, obviously things like time and money. I was wondering if that came up in your research. It might be a future report, but I wonder, is that something that came up when you were doing the research?
Fantastic. And we're always keen for future research ideas. So we'll be coming our way back to you, I'm sure, at some point. Yes.
I'm Nikita. I work at the Centre for Social Justice. I had a similar question, kind of looking at barriers to work. Thank you for the report. I think it's wonderful to kind of focus on the skills gap. But kind of traveling around the country for visiting the 700 charities we work with, one of the barriers that comes up again and again is transport. So you could have the right skills or you could be matched with the right jobs, but particularly for the cohort of people we work with, the bottom 10%, the most disadvantaged, transport in some of these areas is just not possible. They just can't get to those jobs. So I'm just interested in how when we look at devolution of support throughout the country, how we can marry some of these barriers, these logistical barriers, with coupling people with better jobs and good work.
Well, it's almost like we planned it, really, because Andrew, you get 3 questions at the end to kind of articulate some of your research. I mean, they all come back to a singular point about barriers, I guess. Mental health and some of the challenges around that, time and money, looking at transport. What do you think? Again, imagine yourself, you're the senior civil servant going in to advise the new minister going in. What are the key barriers you think that they should be looking at, and what do you think from your reports they should be doing about them?
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely agree about mental health as a barrier. I think your point about good work being good for people's physical health and mental health actually is a really important one that we need to remember at the same time. But definitely agree. And I think there's a couple of different things there. So in our research, we really focused on very specifically on kind of how to enable people to access kind of advice and support related to employment. So that was kind of the sole focus of the research. But clearly, at what we describe as kind of the digital front door idea is that kind of initial triage type conversation with someone. What kind of situation are you in? What are you looking for? What kind of support help might you need? I know, having also done research at visiting various different employment support organisations and charities delivering support to people, that they do work really closely in partnership with local organisations. We did some research looking at how the employment support system kind of works in the area of East Birmingham and North Solihull, which is an area of particularly kind of high socioeconomic deprivation. And I remember a number of those organisations delivering employment support to people talked about the really close partnership working with lots of other organisations, but particularly organisations that support people's mental health, whether that was kind of on the sort of NHS kind of talking therapy side, or whether that was more on the kind of more specialist kind of charitable or VCS sector support side, for example. So I think that's the point. That's the point where we need to think about kind of how to join up and integrate services at the local level. And I think it's certainly not perfect. It certainly could be improved, but I know that there is a reasonable amount of partnership, that kind of partnership working and referring people to relevant services for them that does already happen. So I think that's for people out of work especially, I think that's the key. For people in work, there's a whole other conversation to be had about how we support people's mental health while in work, role of employers, role of the state, etc. So yes. And then other barriers, I think I would go back to this report kind of very much builds on a report we published a couple of years ago, which I mentioned, which is called Working Together, and where we made the case for what we call a universal work service. And when we were thinking through the kind of devolution question in that, we recommended that the kind of overall responsibility for commissioning employment support and skills services should be devolved to combined authorities. And our reasoning was they have the best chance of kind of joining up some of those different kinds of issues and seeing it as a more holistic picture. So, you mentioned transport as a barrier for people. Again, this came up quite often in the research in Birmingham, where people talked about, there are jobs available, but the public transport is not accessible for people to get to them. And the combined authority level, for areas that have them, that provides the best opportunity, I think, to kind of integrate, I suppose, both the kind of the economic functions of policy making, along with the kind of role they have in delivering types of public service to people, like the adult education budget and skills, and some types of employment support in some areas, and probably moving further in that direction.
Thank you, Andrew. And yes, we're just coming to the end now, and there'll be some more networking afterwards, so a chance to keep the conversation going. But to sort of end on a positive note, I guess I'm going to ask each of the panelists to think 5 years down the line, the end of this Parliament. What would they like to be able to say has happened over the next 5 years that's helped us to hit some of the targets that we've spoken about here? So I'll start with you, Anne-Marie, and I'll go to Catherine, and I'll finish with Tony. But yeah, what would you like to be able to say that's happened in this period to tackle these challenges?
Yeah, I'd like to, on the careers front, I'd like to really be able to say that we've been able to develop clear career paths that people understand, that people know how they can move through those career paths, and that it's a much more effective system to be able to utilise the skills that we have in our labour force in the most effective way.
Catherine?
I guess in 5 years, that substantially more people would answer that yes, they have heard of the whatever it is, jobs and careers service, but fundamentally that they believe that an employment and career service exists and that exists for them.
Gosh, well, it's a great challenge, isn't it? I think I'd like to see progress against all those objectives we talked about, but fundamentally, I'd like there to be a different kind of attitude and a different kind of narrative around how we deliver employment support and what that looks like. I'd like there to be a sort of jobs and careers service that people want to go to, and it's distinctly it's somewhere where you go not to talk about what you did last week or to talk about what you must do, but to talk about what you're going to do next and what you could do with the right support, and that people want to engage with, and that's linked up and integrated locally, that's being delivered locally, not just through sort of national services and national offices, that we're experimenting on different ways of delivering this, that we're joining up better through local plans and integrated services, and that we've just got a fundamentally different kind of approach, and one that recognises that we need to deliver benefits efficiently. There's always going to be mutual obligations in the system, but that these are two different functions, that how we make sure people are being paid the right amount of money and are meeting the sort of requirements of being on benefit is different to how we deliver employment support. And I think and as I said before, I think this is a great opportunity, because I do think like this is somewhere where we can really make a difference, and where we can start to close that gap with the rest of the country, with the rest of the world, and we can start to narrow those gaps for particularly disadvantaged groups and address those underlying inequalities, and hopefully support a more inclusive labour market, stronger economy, more growth, improved living standards, and everything else. And this is it. I think this is, employment, labour market policies is going to be kind of, one of the touch points about whether we can do this, whether we can reform supply side policies to deliver stronger growth and more inclusive economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panelists and to Andrew for this, fantastic report that he's produced. You're all very keen on this subject, obviously, so you'll be delighted to know in a couple of weeks' time we have a report coming out about youth hubs and how we're providing kind of support to younger people. So I expect to see every single one of you here at that event, because it is pretty much at the same time, on the same day of the week, in just 2 weeks' time. So you're clearly free on Tuesday around 10 o'clock. So be delighted to see loads of you there, and there'll be a new report coming out on that. Again, a big thank you to Phoenix Insights for working with us on this amazing report, which lots of great ideas on it. To our panelists, there are some copies I can see freshly printed at the back, so you'll be able to take it home with you and study it in your own free time. I guess we are going to be seeing, I think Catherine had a really good point about patience, and we need new governments coming in, and we're all hopeful there'll be lots of policy development analysis, but it's going to take them time to get their feet under the table. But I think Tony and Anne-Marie and Catherine are all right in saying that unless we tackle this particular issue, we're not going to see those wider mission goals achieved. We're not going to see the economic growth we're looking for. So I'm hopeful that this event and this report will contribute to that debate. And a big thank you to all of you for attending. Big thank you to people on camera and watching on YouTube. And look forward to networking with you all and seeing you all at one of our events very soon. So thank you. Thanks, Tony. Great points as always.
Welcome. Thank you.
It was a good one. I haven't read it entirely.